Okay, welcome to our amazing podcast. And on this podcast, we each week have a different guest, and we ask the guests to share their opinions on who is the most amazing person, the most amazing object, the most amazing animal, the most amazing quote, the most amazing book. And then finally, we ask the person what their opinion is on the most amazing thing ever. And this is because at Our Amazing, we like to find the ordinary in every day, and we do this on our website at our-amazing.com. So this week our special guest is Mike Gilbert, and Mike's going to share his opinions on who he thinks are the best people, objects, animals, quotes, books and things ever. And Mike loves politics, and he has very interesting views on the world, and we're probably going to learn a bit about these as we go through. Hello, Mike.
Thank you.
Right. Okay. So, Mike, who is, in your opinion, the most amazing person?
Well, there are a number, but I think if I had to choose one, I'd say somebody by the name of Karl Marx, who, if people have any knowledge of him at all, think that he's nothing but trouble. But actually, I think that he inspired a vast array of people all over Europe and around the world to look at how ordinary working people were being treated by what was a very harsh and cruel capitalist system. So for me, Karl Marx is amazing.
Yeah. Okay. So what, you said misunderstood. What parts of Karl Marx do you think most people misunderstand?
Well, I think the name Karl Marx is too often associated with people like Vladimir Lenin in Russia, the father of the Russian Revolution, if you like. And so his name has become associated with totalitarianism, it's become associated with authoritarianism, autocracy, cruelty. And actually, Karl Marx himself was a very liberal-minded individual. He wanted to see ordinary working people extended the same rights as everybody else. The people at the top of the tree should have the same rights as the people at the bottom, and the people at the bottom should have the same rights as the people at the top. He was very much a forerunner of a sort of democratic movement, if you like,
in
Europe.
Yeah, so equality and equity. He sounds like you're saying that he was a forerunner for that. Yeah, because I know I've spoken to you about this before, and you're saying about the people at the top and the elite and the working classes. Is that there's I know Boris talks about it at the moment about levelling up. And you're saying, I think you were saying to me that Karl Marx wouldn't see that it should be more levelling down, because let's be honest, the people are never going to step out the way, are they?
No. I mean, the reality is that if you've got power structures that look like a pyramid, then you're always going to have people at the top. And of course, leadership is a reality. We all need people to sort of step up to the plate from time to time and to act in the role of leader. But when those leaders are permanently at the top of that pyramid and there's no way of actually removing them, then you've essentially got something which is more like an autocracy than it is a democracy. And so Marx's view would be that you need to sort of try and bring the pyramid down so that the people at the top have similar rights to those people, the vast majority of people who form this broad base at the bottom. Complete equality is a fantasy, of course, but you can get nearer to it than we've got at the moment. Let's put it that way.
What rights do you think are different at the top to the people at the bottom? What did Marx think was the difference between the rights?
Well, if you go back to 1840, I mean, absolutely stark. No education, no healthcare, no pensions, no welfare. If you didn't work, if you couldn't contract for employment or freely contract for employment, then you and your family would starve. And Marx was acutely aware of the reality of that, because he himself was what you might call a jobbing journalist. Okay. He was hawking himself around Europe looking for work, often being pushed out of various countries because he was seen as a troublemaker. But nonetheless, he had a very acute awareness of what it was like to be right at the bottom of the pile. Yeah. And today, it's not quite so stark. I mean, today, when we do enjoy things like welfare, healthcare, pensions, wealth, we've got the things that most people back in the 1840s could only dream of. But nonetheless, I mean, things like access to political power, access to political influence, These things are still apparent at the top of society, but they're not apparent at the bottom. You've only got to see the number of famous individuals whose offspring go into successful professions to know that there is still a them and us kind of culture in the Western world, and that people are not really enabled to get to the top on the basis of merit. They get there because of who they know and what strings they can pull.
And another thing, during COVID and lockdown, this become really apparent, especially over Christmas, when we were all told to be locked down, be careful, stay like this. You were seeing all the wealthy and the rich going off to St. Bart's and Dubai, and the masses were asked for the greater good, and still now, to to not travel and to not do these things. Most people were doing that, but the wealthy seem to live by, or the elite perhaps, seem to be living by different rules at times.
Yeah, well, that's pretty much what Karl Marx was saying, that the very wealthy, the people at the top of society, live by a different set of rules to the people at the bottom. And although the extremes are now much narrower, we don't have the kind of extremes that Marx sort of observed in the 1840s. We do still experience those differences, that the wealthy can hop on a plane and fly out to somewhere nice and warm, and they can enjoy sort of lockdown from the vantage point of a tropical beach, where somebody in this country might find themselves locked into their 4th or 5th story flat. It isn't the same. It isn't the same world for everybody. Now, nobody would sensibly talk about there being an absolute equality, and Marx doesn't talk about an absolute equality. From each according to their ability, to each according to their needs is an important quote. But what it basically means is that we're all different. And unfortunately, we still have systems and structures in place which enable a kind of class-based discrimination to carry on. And that's something that Marx wanted to put an end to.
And I think you see that within the people who've been prime minister. Most of them have been to private school. Most of the cabinet is privately educated, and then equally within the justice system, there is an element of, if you can, the best lawyers cost more, and then it's not available for everyone. And you're saying that the way of doing that is, instead of keeping it, is to flatten the pyramid, rather than to try and
rather than trying to do that, rather than to level up, which is essentially doing that, you do that. You flatten the pyramid. So you take either through a very progressive taxation system, which ensures that corporations and individuals who are super wage earners, pay their fair share of tax, or whether you find other means of creating a flatter and more equal society. It's absolutely essential that the governments and working people across the world, not just in this country, but elsewhere, start to think about how we can deliver that. If we don't start thinking about how we can deliver that, the situation for ordinary working people is going to get significantly worse. That's what I believe anyway.
Yeah, because I remember you saying about the levelling up, is that it does level up, but everybody moves up together. So the triangle remains the same, because the people at the top aren't necessarily going to let the next lot get up to the top as well. So the levelling up just moves everyone up a rung on the ladder, is your argument on it, isn't it? Is how you see it.
It is, yeah. You could argue since the end of the Second World War, what we've had is a levelling up program. So we've all got better off, but the people at the top with the power have retained the power of the people at the top. And although we feel that we're better off now because we've got a decent welfare system, we still don't have any political influence, and we are still essentially at the bottom of that pyramid.
So as everybody is sort of desiring to get to the top is always moving the same distance away from them. It's almost it's very difficult. There's only very few people who can break through that ceiling.
Yeah, it's almost like in the 1970s, they used to talk about, the trade union movement would talk about differentials. You had to have pay differentials between unskilled and semi-skilled and skilled workers. And it's a bit like that within the political and social and economic system, we still have these differentials. So if you're at the top, you need to stay at the top. No matter how much better off people at the bottom get, the top will always be better off than the people at the bottom. The people at the top will always have significantly more power and influence than the people at the bottom. So there's almost like this unwritten rule of differentials. We must maintain the differentials. Even though we're leveling up, let's maintain the differentials.
Yeah, that's a fair point. So yeah, and that's slightly moved away slightly there from, but that Karl Marx you'd say would talk about flattening down, and that's why he's your most amazing person.
Yeah, because he talked about something called the dictatorship of the proletariat, which of course puts the fear of God into most people when they hear a phrase like that, in the same way that people are fearful of words like revolution. But essentially, these things simply mean dramatic change. Dictatorship of the proletariat simply means the ordinary working person has much more political influence than they had at the time that Karl Marx was writing. So that they can actually influence the way government policy is formed and delivered, and ensure that it meets their needs as well as the needs of the people right at the top of the social spectrum. So I don't think there's anything wrong with these terms. And Marx was the first individual to coin these phrases, which unfortunately have been picked up by dictators and totalitarians, and have been interpreted in ways that Marx wouldn't really have recognised, and wouldn't really have understood, if I'm honest.
And I think I'll put a link below, but I understand you've written 4 pamphlets that sort of explain and untangle Marx. So I'll put a link below to those, and so that people can see your views on why you think Karl Marx is the most amazing person ever. Cool. So that takes us on to the next object, the next thing that's amazing, which is objects. So what, in your opinion, is the most amazing object ever?
Well, there are so many amazing objects, aren't there? Everything from the printing press to the motor car to the computer. But the thing that I would choose as my most amazing object is the refrigerator. Because whereas all the other things actually make what we normally do a bit easier, traveling around. If you've got cars, we used to walk around, but it was still a form of transport, so we could meet people. The printing press, was just a better way of communicating in writing, but we've been communicating in writing since, the dawn of time, 10,000 years ago. But the refrigerator is a completely unique piece of kit, in the sense that it does something which we'd never been able to do before it was invented. We weren't able to store food. So consequently, food had a shelf life, which was very short. We could do certain things, pickling things, putting things in salt to make them last a bit longer. But until the refrigerator came along, there was a real limit on what you could do with food and how you could preserve it. The refrigerator and freezers actually enable food to be stored almost in perpetuity. So they've massively reduced waste, and they've almost democratized to some extent the availability of food for all those people who find themselves, on a limited budget or whatever.
So since the 1970s, I found this out a little while ago, our population has almost doubled. Do you think that would have been impossible without like refrigeration and freezing and stuff?
I would say so, yes, because food prices would have been absolutely prohibitive, because as soon as you brought a crop out of the ground, you could can it, and there's no, there were things and there were technologies available and have been for a long time. But refrigeration is by far the most efficient way of storing food in a way which makes it as nutritious and nourishing as it was when it was either first slaughtered or first pulled out the ground. So yeah, I think there would have been the issue about the birth rate would have been a function of the availability of food and the cost of food. So without refrigeration, I think food would be significantly more expensive than it is now, and that would have had a downward pressure on the number of people that families could afford to bring into the world.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Because I guess we generally don't stop to appreciate, sort of like you'd go open the fridge, grab your milk, pour it in the tea, pop the milk back in the fridge, close the door, and probably not take another second thought about that object. But yeah, that changes everything, doesn't it? Like putting stuff in there just enables you to transport it, make it last longer.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Consume it fresh.
yeah, as fresh as, because like by keeping milk in the fridge, it makes it last just enough longer. You can get another couple of bowls of
Yeah, yeah.
cereals, another cups of tea out of it. So and there's like
Yeah.
you said, a lot less waste.
It's an amazing piece of kit. I mean, an amazing object. And as I say, prior to that being invented, a lot of food would have just been wasted because it wouldn't have been able to be preserved. I don't know about, I mean, canning is important, but I don't think canning is very wasteful in terms of space, and you need huge production facilities. You know, we've got something in our own kitchens which enables us, as you say, to extend the lifespan of a pint of milk from a couple of days in the summer or a day in the summer for maybe a week or longer.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, and in this time, like I suppose if you look at how we look at the environment now, and about reusing, not wasting, and yeah, it's the perfect thing, isn't it? Like
Yeah.
throwing stuff out that's just not being able to eat. It just enables you to, and I suppose it enables you to share and store. Yeah, yeah, it's weird, isn't it? I hadn't really thought about the refrigerator. Yeah, I've got no idea when the refrigerator was invented, but like the classic ones are like the Smeg 1950 designs, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah.
So I think they really started taking off in the 1950s, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. I don't know when they were invented either.
No, I don't either.
I guess it was sometime during the early part of the 20th century that they were first invented. But now, of course, they've become, as you say, the Smeg is a classic an icon, isn't it? Design icon. So you know, they've taken their place alongside everything else as part of the sort of the design of kitchens and design creations. So they don't just have a function; they also have a form now as well.
Yeah, very true. Cool. So yeah, refrigerator is the most amazing object. So the next most amazing object is animals. So in your opinion, what is the most amazing animal?
Well, I don't know a lot about animals, to be honest, but it's a toss up between a cat and a dog, really. The cat because of independence, and the fact that they're self-reliant, and they're a very efficient sort of animal. But on the other hand, I think I'd have to come down in favour of the dog, because the dog is an animal that is cooperative, and on the whole works in collaboration with its pack to try and achieve for itself and its pack desirable outcomes that benefit the whole of the group rather than just the individual. So for me, I guess if you look, I mean, I look at things in perhaps in metaphorical terms. For me, a dog and a pack of dogs is more of a metaphor for how society should function than the self-interest and the rather sort of psychotic instincts of the cat.
Yeah. I think it might have been you or someone else who told me that if you want to know what a sociopath looks like or a psychopath, just study a cat.
yeah. Well, absolutely. I mean, they got all the relevant characteristics.
Everything's on their terms. They're kind and affectionate when you're going to give them what they want, like food. But yeah, it's interesting. And what you're saying about dogs being sociable is really interesting, because I recently read a book. I think it's called Humankind. I can't remember the author's name, but it says that cavemen had bigger brains than us, but Homo sapiens, we're smarter because we work collectively. Work emotionally and collectively, and we can work on sort of common goals. So like, I don't know, my strength might be technology, someone else's strength might be design or something like that, but you come together and out of that you get something greater as the work of the whole. And dogs very much work like that, don't they? Like when you look at husky dogs working as a pack to pull it through. And dogs also help us smell. Like they can detect cancer in humans, and they work together with us, like guide dogs as well. It's not, they're very social animals, aren't they?
Yeah, I think they've got lots of unique characteristics that enable the bond between them and us to be useful, and mutually beneficial. I don't think there are many other animals that are quite like that. Maybe in the past the horse, but certainly in the modern age, you know, the dog continues to be a useful ally to human beings in a vast array of different environments where we couldn't do things on our own, and they add additional value to whatever it is that the Homo sapien is attempting to do.
Yeah, because they say dogs are, my brain's gone dead. but yeah, dogs connect with us. They have that emotional connection. I know what I was going to remember what I was going to say is that the difference between a dog and humans. I think we learn in a very similar way. If someone tells us off, like you tell a dog, they know, like we do, that it's probably a good idea not to do that again, and that's how we learn. But like, so for example, the idea of like, I remember seeing your cat. So like, if a dog scratches the furniture and you tell a dog off, you go, no, not, and take the dog out the room, and the dog will know not to scratch the furniture again. However, a cat, if it scratches the furniture and you tell it off and you throw it out the window, it, instead of going, they don't like that, I don't want them to scratch, I won't scratch the furniture anymore, the cat thinks, if I scratch when I want to go out, I will scratch the furniture. It's about what I get out of it. Whereas a dog, there's that connection. And apparently a dog is one of the very few animals that will follow a point of a finger. If you point somewhere, the dog won't look at your finger and look at where you're pointing.
Yeah.
So there's that social connection as well. Yeah. We here at Are Amazing, we wrote dogs are amazing, and I think it covers that in this. So I have to agree that dogs are amazing. Is there anything else in particular about dogs that?
No, I think they're just an all-round, good animal, and a kind of an ally and a friend of the human race, and they have been for 50,000 years, and I'm sure they will continue to be.
Yeah, there's a really interesting film called Alpha, which hypothesizes how the dog and humans got that partnership together.
Yeah.
And the hypothesis that comes in the movie is that there was a fire and the dog was cold, and it came in near the fire, and then someone sort of threw the dog a bit of a treat, a bit of food that they'd eaten, and it was like, the film,
positive reinforcement.
So dogs. I would be very much with you on dogs. We work very well together. Okay, so the next one, in your opinion, what's the most amazing quote? Now, I think you might have mentioned it a little bit earlier in your other one, just to give people a clue, but one of your earlier amazings. But what, in your opinion, is the most amazing quote?
Well, as you'd expect, it's a quote from Karl Marx, and Karl Marx made the observation that we should share resources so that we share it on the basis of from each according to their ability to each according to their needs. And that's a very complicated quote in the sense that, let's just tease it out. Let's try and understand what exactly it means. But it essentially means that where people have needs, those needs are met, and where they have advantages, those advantages are used not just for the benefit of themselves, but for the benefit of others. So the fundamental, a bit like the basis of Christianity is love thy neighbor. The basis of Marxism is really from each according to their ability to each according to their needs. The problem is the interpretation of that and how you deliver it, the practice of it has tended to create all kinds of weird and wonderful economic and social outcomes, such as the collectivization of agriculture in the Soviet Union and sort of state socialism all over the world, because the general view is taken that to achieve that outcome, the government has to do the mediating on behalf of the individuals involved. Whereas I think what Marx was trying to say was that actually the state doesn't really have a big role here. This is something about individuals doing these things, collectively together in an intuitive and psychologically mature sort of way. So the state really had no major part to play in this. But the problem is that if you think about how to deliver it, it's quite a challenge. It really requires a change in the way people think, as opposed to, it's not just about the way people do things, it's the way people think about things, it's the way that they think about themselves and the way they think about others. It isn't about outsourcing that responsibility to the government to do it.
Yeah, and I suppose all of us can do it on a macro level in our everyday lives.
Yeah.
We can share it. But yeah, funny enough, I was having a conversation with someone the other day who was saying, why are these billionaires trying to get us into space and Mars and all of that, when like it's being sold as a greater good for humanity?
Yeah.
But really, surely before you start going to a different planet, let's sort out, if you're going to use your money to sort out homelessness and inequality here before sort of building another pod on another planet. And I hadn't really understood it from, like you said, about the advantages. If you have advantages, you use those advantages to help others below you, who are having a tough time. But that doesn't seem how the system works at the moment. People tend to want more and more, and because really nobody needs. Like, I've always had this theory that once you've hit £1 billion, you should have won at life. You've won at life, you've won, and no one should have any more than £1 billion, because really you're never going to spend it in a lifetime.
No.
But that's not how we work. Even at £1 billion, people still want more and more and more. It's like you win at life, and anything you make after £1 billion, you have to give to good causes down. But that's just a theory that I've always had. But that's not where we're at.
Well, you mentioned my pamphlets. I mean, if anyone's interested in sort of looking into the sort of the psychology of this particular quote from Marx, they could look at the pamphlet called "Solving the Riddle of History Simplified," because it explains that that's very much about psychology. It's very much about you as an individual recognizing where your talents can be used to assist others, and also recognizing where the needs of others may require some kind of assistance. It isn't something which is mediated by somebody else. It's not something which is mediated by the state, for example. But the point you make about why do people want more, and well, that's largely because we've come from a capitalist heritage, and there's nothing wrong with that. Marx was himself pro-capitalism. It's not pro-capitalism, let's put it this way. He understood the qualities that capitalism that brought into the world that enabled us to move away from feudalism. Feudalism was the sort of the system that existed before capitalism. It was very rigid, hierarchical. You knew your place. You couldn't go anywhere other than your allotted position within the hierarchy. What capitalism did was created a sense of anarchy within the economy, so you could move up and down. It's still very hierarchical, but it was very much hierarchical in terms of the positions. Anybody could be at the top, and anybody could be at the bottom, but you would still have a top and a bottom. So what Marx tried to do was explore, how you could sort of again address that particular problem of people being at the top and people being at the bottom. But because we've had that heritage from capitalism of having this very sort of stratified sort of society, people's instincts are to work their way up to the top. Politicians talk about leveling up, moving people up to the top. Individuals want to win the national lottery. They want to get to the top. The whole drive is about getting us as far away from the people at the bottom as we can. Whereas what Marx is saying within that quote is that maybe we need to stop thinking like that and stop thinking about how much more we can get over somebody else, and actually start thinking about, isn't it more humane and maybe a lot more fulfilling to do things which are clearly of benefit to other people, and clearly other people will do similar things in an attempt to benefit us? And isn't that a better way of ordering society if you can achieve it?
Yeah, well, that's very much like we were saying about with the dog, wasn't it? With the dog's collaborative, it helps us. It helps people who are in needy. So like the dog's the eyes for the people without the eyes, whose eyes don't work. And and we're similar to dogs. And it says that humans work better when we work in collaboration. And that's why we've achieved more than cavemen. They had bigger brains, but we work in collaboration. And and I suppose when you're going up and you're trying to get up to the top, as you say, you're thinking very much about yourself and where you want to go. and perhaps that causes a lot of angst and distress. But whereas if we choose to work as a communities together for a greater good, we achieve more.
It's much better. We just got to change the way we think about things. We've got to change our consciousness, Mark's called it. You know, we have a consciousness which is sort of downloaded into us. We weren't born with a consciousness that discriminates against people or sees getting to the top of the society as an important aspiration for us. You know, these expectations are created by the economy and by society. And so what we need to do is we need to try and recognize where these drivers come from, and then see whether or not we could really begin to sort of change the way we perceive ourselves and others, and maybe think a little bit more about being a lot more collaborative. For example, the issue of leadership is interesting, because we know we always have to have leaders. I mean, in every situation, somebody will come forward as a leader, but leadership without power, in other words, that power from being at the top of the hierarchy, that leadership without power is cooperation. So if there's a serious incident and someone steps forward and begins to sort of organise the traffic and make sure that, you know, the injured person is safe, and they're coordinating everything, they're a leader. You know, now they've got no power, but that is a very important leadership role that person has taken on.
That's quite
becomes problematic when you say to that person, now you've got power.
Yeah, well, I suppose if you look at it, that if there's an accident and the police car pulls over and starts ordering traffic, that police officer has power from the state to do stuff. However, until the police officer gets there, a member of the public will probably do something similar, but there's not power. And the people who are following that person are doing it out of cooperation and understanding that if I was in a similar situation like that, I would like someone to do that for me.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, I can see that. And that is for each according to their own.
Yeah, from each according to their ability, to each according to their needs. So it's essentially, it's like an algorithm for how we need to try and aspire to this algorithm. We're not there yet. You know, we've still got sort of 200 years of capitalist self-interest to try and wrestle with, to start thinking about how we can not aspire to become top of the pyramid, treading on all sorts of other people as we get to the top, but starting to think about how we can, you know, improve the lives of other people while simultaneously having others improving our life at the same time. So it's a very different way of thinking about the world. But you can see when you hear people talking about how we can solve the West's problems, whether or not they're thinking about it coming from the top down, in which case it just reflects the way we've been doing things for 200 years, or whether it reflects something along the lines of what Marx was talking about, which is getting over this obstacle, this psychological demand to do better than other people, and actually look to how we can, you know, bring society to a much healthier, happier and safer place by not being obsessed with how far we can get up some, you know, hypothetical kind of hierarchy.
It focuses much more on collaboration and working for a common goal rather than an individual goal.
Yeah, I mean, in the Western world, of course the currency for this process of scrambling to the top of the pyramid is money. So people tend to sort of see money in terms of power and power in terms of money, you know, it becomes a preoccupation, and because we obsess and we're preoccupied with it, we ignore the needs of other people. We ignore the fact that you've got individuals who, for one reason or another, you know, may have a very, very different life experience to ours, a very problematic life experience to ours. We don't reach out to those people. What we do is we look at them and we turn the other way. We turn away from them. We try and avoid them. But actually, those individuals who need that support, because they don't get it, probably become something of a problem to the rest of society, to the rest of the community. We just got to think again about how we order society and try and think about doing it without obsessing about ourselves and how much we can get.
That's quite interesting what you said, is because I read an article about the prisoners who are treated with kindness and compassion are much less likely to go on and reoffend.
Yeah,
and we all treat, if we treat everyone with kindness, society will sort of happen. But like, if someone commits an awful crime against your family, you want punishment. But like, the thing that's most likely to create an environment of that crime not being committed again is kindness and compassion, because the person's probably lacked the kindness and compassion in the first place to commit the crime.
You've got to have you've got to have a society which acknowledges that, you know, we all behave in a certain way, and we're all to some extent programmed to behave in ways which put our needs and our self-interest first. So an offender, for example, somebody who steals, for argument's sake, may be doing no more than trying to get a slightly bigger slice of the economic pie. Well, that's what everyone's trying to do. Just that they've done it in a way which doesn't sort of fit in with the expectations of the rest of society. If they were to do it in a way which did fit in with the rest of society, maybe they wouldn't be quite so successful because they haven't got the necessary skills or whatever. So it's a case of just recognizing that often what we do is the same as what everybody else is doing, but we just do it in a way which creates problems for everybody else. And maybe, as I say, you know, by looking at those individuals who struggle to get a decent share of the economic pie, maybe we need to look at how we can help them to gain that greater slice, rather than just condemn them because they haven't been able to achieve it.
I think the slice is interesting. There's a really interesting video somewhere on YouTube, if you look at it, about like the capitalist slice or money slice. I think if you cut a pie into 10, and then out of that pie, I think the wealthiest have like 8 or 9 slices of it. Of the rich. Oh, sorry, it's not. It's 5. I think they cut the slice into 5, and it equates to each richest 20%.
Yeah.
Each pie is the richest 20%, and the richest 20% take like 4 slices. Of that pie, and then that one piece is then divided between the other ones. But like the poorest 20%, they don't even get the crumbs. That's for the second. They get the crumbs. The poorest 20%, they owe pie. They owe it. It's a fascinating video. I haven't probably explained it too well, but it's worth checking it out, and you just realise the inequality. And perhaps your quote would sort of perhaps start to address that inequality.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
that's its aim anyway.
That's exactly right. Because I mean, at the end of the day, you know, from each according to his ability to each according to their needs. I mean, you don't need to have £100 billion or $100 billion. I mean, you don't need it. You know, and what are you doing with it? Well, most of it sits offshore in some sort of tax haven, doing nothing. It's just accumulating. I mean, it's not being made to work to create opportunities for people, to create jobs. It just sits there, and somebody gets, you know, more and more grossly wealthy, you know, acquiring that kind of money. And what they should be thinking about is how they can put it into something which is socially good, which, as I say, ideally fulfills this quote from Marx's critique of the Gotha program, that the things should go from each according to their ability to each according to their needs. And that isn't just money, it's talent as well.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It opens up so many discussions, and we could have gone down.
It's fascinating.
Yeah. So that takes us on to the next most amazing one, which is books. So, your opinion, what's the most amazing book?
Well, when I was asked this question, I thought, what book is a kind of game changer? What book, a bit like the refrigerator, it's a game changer. You know, what book has changed the world? Now, you know, I'm not a promoter for the existence or non-existence of God. I don't know whether God exists, but the book which I think has been fundamental to changing the way society has evolved over the last 2,000 years is the New Testament, which is, as we all know, the Gospels, the story of somebody called Jesus Christ, a man who lived in the Middle East, in Jerusalem, in the 1st century. The Gospel stories are about his life and about his preachings and his sayings and his stories. And I actually think the New Testament has had a fundamental effect on making the world a more accepting and more tolerant place. The message from the Gospels is love thy neighbour. Now that was a completely revolutionary idea at the time that Jesus was promoting it. I mean, we had a Middle East that was continually at war, tribes sort of fighting amongst themselves, slavery, inequality, and the harsh realities of a sort of society emerging into the world of kings and authority and power. And Jesus came along and said, basically, love thy neighbour. In the midst of all this, what I think was so staggering, and the reason why I think he was such a threat to the prevailing ideologies at the time, not just the one ideology, Judaism, but all ideologies, was that it was just like, what? Who is this nutcase? Who is this individual who's wandering around preaching this stuff that we can't even get our heads around? In a funny sort of way, I mean, it does link to the Marxism, in the sense that from each according to his abilities to each according to their needs, is a bit like love thy neighbour, isn't it? It's a bit like kind of be aware of other people, and have some concern for other people. So Jesus was saying something back then that was very revolutionary, in the same way that I think what Marx was saying 170 years ago was very revolutionary. They are two people who are revolutionaries, and Jesus did exist. I mean, people often say, well, they don't know whether God existed, or and in many ways, who cares whether God exists or God doesn't exist? The reality is that Jesus did exist. He's recorded in Roman records as having existed, and what he preached was completely revolutionary in the context of the Middle East at that time.
Yeah. So like love thy neighbour. It's about like it's almost non-judgment, really, isn't it? It's just support, love and support everyone. We're all going through the same battles. We don't really know why or what's led you to behave the way that you've behaved, but love your neighbour, no judgment, just support.
And if you can't, and I think the other important thing, I mean, to kind of highlight the importance of sort of getting this stuff embedded into your own mind. I mean, Jesus was realistic enough to realize that, given the context that he was in, within which he was saying these things, the vast majority of people wouldn't get their heads around it. I mean, this was an era when if you got half a chance, you bashed somebody on the head and you took what they got. We were barely out of a tribal environment. It was certainly the early days of kingship and authority and slavery and all that sort of business. So it's a pretty unpleasant place for anyone to be living who wasn't at the top of that pyramid, that their pinnacle back then. But he said, follow me, follow my example. So if you can't get your head around this stuff, and it's difficult to get your head around it, follow my example. And it's a little bit the same with from each according to their ability to each according to their needs. What does that mean? How do you interpret something like that? How do we in the 21st century interpret something of that kind? It's the same problem that I think, Jesus would have confronted when he said, love thy neighbor. It wouldn't have made much sense to people. That wasn't the kind of world where you did that kind of thing. It was odd to sort of be asked to do something which was completely at odds with the way that you've been brought up, with the brutality of how you'd been treated as a child, you've seen your family treated and whatever. So what Jesus, I think, says, and the Gospels sort of, are good examples where this message is pushed. If you can't get your head around this stuff, then just follow my example. Just do what I do, and then you've got the stories that tell you how to behave in certain situations, the parables and all that sort of thing. So it's quite a remarkable. The New Testament is a completely remarkable book. It's a complete break from the Old Testament. The Old Testament and the New Testament have got practically nothing in common. In the Old Testament, you've got the brutality of that early period in the Middle East. In the New Testament, you've got this completely bizarre idea that you break from all that and you start thinking about caring for others. Just a wild idea.
I think that's the theme, isn't it? Really, about caring for others and not just being not just thinking of yourself and what you want,
Yeah.
what you can get out of it. That's sort of like been the theme, hasn't it? Like
Mm.
dogs, and for each according to their own. You think each one of those, and including the New Testament, make you think of others and not
Yeah.
just yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It was a completely revolutionary book, and Jesus was a completely revolutionary human being. Whether or not you believe he was the Son of God is irrelevant. He was a very unique human being, and what he did was remarkable, and had never been done before. The idea that you would allow yourself to be killed, rather than fighting it. You would just let the authority take control of you and put you to death, rather than sort of rise up and try and smite them and try and create violent revolution and try and stir up trouble, which were all the things that were going on back then. I mean, had Jesus been a different sort of human being, he'd have tried to get the mob behind him, but he didn't. He actually he is the example of that quote. Love thy neighbor. He's a perfect living embodiment of how important something like that is. And I think the New Testament has probably, I mean, we've had a fractious kind of 2,000 years. We've had wars and we've had all sorts of problems. But I think that to some extent, a lot of that has been mitigated by the influence of Christianity in the world.
Because even though sometimes we feel that war, there's been a lot of war. I think I can't remember which author it was. I want to say Steven Pinker, but I might be wrong. But it says that these last 100 years, even though we've had 2 world wars, it might be longer, but it's as humanity, in humanity, it's the least amount of violence and conflict ever. We're getting there almost.
Yeah,
but
we're slowly getting there. That message of love thy neighbor is slowly becoming embedded into our consciousnesses. Not in a kind of learning by rote kind of way, but in a way which really means something to us. We don't want to cause harm to others. I think we really are, by instinct, collaborative people. The human species is collaborative. It works together to achieve things. It's the imposition over the last 10,000 years of hierarchy and power, which has taken us away from our natural instinct to work alongside other people to achieve a collectively good outcome for ourselves.
Yeah. No, that it all from that one book.
Yeah.
Cool. So this takes us on to the final one, which is your opinion on the most amazing thing ever. And so what's your
Well, again, I'm probably going to be the most boring contributor to your podcast, because I mean, a lot of the stuff.
But boring's subjective, isn't it? Everyone's got different interests. This is what makes
this is really going to.
Everyone thinks something else is amazing, and it's about what each person's opinion is. So this is
really going to put people to sleep. Okay, so
what is it? Your most amazing thing?
So we've talked about the New Testament. Well, of course, the problem that I guess the people who understood the Christian message had was that the world of the 1st, 2nd, 3rd centuries onwards was very much built around hierarchy. So although we might have in the Gospels the notion of being treated equally and being kind of kind to one another and respecting everybody and loving thy neighbor, the secular world was very much about the hierarchy. I mean, Karl Marx called all of these eras of exploitation. Somebody at the top basically taking advantage of people further down the pyramid. Okay, the ages of exploitation. They've existed for 10, 15, 20,000 years. So the New Testament came into a world which was very much based on hierarchy, power, authority, control, collusion, you name it, words that don't mean you've got freedom, you've got choice, you've got consent, you've got conscience, the ability to use your own conscience. So in the early 16th century, the world was very much about the Catholic Church and the Holy Roman Emperor controlling Europe, a span right across Europe, where the Pope was the spiritual head, the Holy Roman Emperor was the secular head, and between them there was rigid control exercised right the way across the world of Europe. Now the problem is that, of course, everybody had their place in this hierarchy. There was power going down from the top. If you stepped outside the accepted interpretations of things, and that would be the accepted interpretations of the Bible, you could find yourself being punished, burnt at the stake, excommunicated, treated in a shameful way. Okay, and that went on for a long time. But the first person to challenge that, the first person to come along and say, I don't actually agree with the way that you're interpreting the Gospels. I don't really agree with the way you're telling me that I must reach God through the Pope and through the priesthood and all that sort of business, that I must work through the power that comes down from the top, was a guy called Martin Luther. And Martin Luther had a whole range of criticisms of the Catholic Church. They were too secular, they were too hierarchical, they were too interested in promoting the interests of the priesthood. They weren't interested enough in ordinary people. And so Martin Luther kickstarted a movement that became known as the Reformation. And this was a reforming movement. So looking at all that Christianity stood for, but looking at it in a way which he felt was much more in line with what Jesus would have expected, rather than what the popes and the hierarchy of the Catholic Church expected. They expected everybody to show deference to them. They were more interested in getting the worship of the public than the public worshipping God. And if there wasn't any worship of God, it was done through them. So they would do really crazy things. So, for example, there were things called indulgences. And an indulgence was a piece of paper that you could go along and buy. And you go to your local church, and you'd say, I want to buy an indulgence, and then you'd hand over a few shillings and they'd give you this piece of paper. And that meant that somebody who'd sinned would go to heaven rather than spend centuries in purgatory. So they were basically conning people by this stage by the early 16th century. The Catholic Church was involved in conning people into parting with their cash, and the cash, of course, would go to look after the interests of the church, not look after the interests of the people. And so Martin Luther stood against this, and he was the first person to do so. And he lit a touch paper, which sort of, if you like, created an explosion, a revolution throughout Europe, and eventually gave rise to what's become known as Protestantism, which was probably the justification, the Christian justification for capitalism. And therefore, you know, the freedoms that we enjoy today, the freedom of thought, the freedom of speech, the freedom of conscience, the democracy that we enjoy, would never have happened had it not been for Martin Luther being able to put what were the instincts of a few people, that the Church of Rome was wrong, into some sort of theological format, and then selling it to people across Europe.
So did the Reformation break the gap? Like so everyone's connection with God would have to go through the Pope or through a priest. Did it crash that, in the sense that after with Protestancy is that everyone's got their direct link to God? That's the difference.
That was the revolution. That was the revolution. Now, I mean, as a classical Marxist, I would say that what Martin Luther was doing was reflecting economic changes that were taking place. There were a growing class of merchants who were dissatisfied with hierarchy wherever they found it. They were unhappy about paying money to the church because they had to. They were unhappy about paying money to their feudal masters because they had to. They were realizing that they got talent and they could make money, and they didn't want to be sort of handing cash out all over the place to these people who they had no real regard for. So I would argue that what Martin Luther did was he captured a growing economic trend, but because he gave it a Christian imprint, he was able to sell it to people.
Yeah, and perhaps he said it at the right time, because if he'd said it 100 or 200 years earlier, He'd probably been burnt at the stake himself, but he said it at the right time, and everyone was ready to receive that message, and it just caused a revolution. Just really.
Yeah, I mean, that revolution took years to kind of conclude. I mean, obviously the Catholic Church still exists, and many ways long may it do so. Protestantism exists, and again, long may it do so. There's nothing wrong with people having faith in things. That's good. It's part of what makes us human, to believe in things. But what we believe can change, and I think what Martin Luther did was he was the first person to come along and say, what you believe in can change. And I'm going to promote this unique way of looking at things, which is rooted in Christianity, but gives very little recognition to the power of authority coming from the top. So he was again another revolutionary.
Yeah. So without the Reformation, there's very little chance that the New Testament would have happened, or it wouldn't have. Jesus wouldn't have perhaps had the foundation to build upon to get the new. It would have been too big a jump.
The Reformation came after, became,
I got my history
1,600 years after Jesus. I think.
Okay. I was in a right muddle then. Right. Okay. As you can see, history isn't my strong point.
Don't worry about it. But no, I mean, the point you make is probably quite valid in the sense that what the New Testament said had been interpreted in a very rigid hierarchical structure, so that the message of the Gospels wasn't coming out in a way which you or I back then could have interpreted for ourselves. We were basically told what it said by an authority who was a secular authority that was greater than ourselves.
So even though what I said I got round the wrong way, so it's probably the other way, that Martin Luther and the Reformation probably couldn't have happened without Jesus. Without New Testament thinking.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, what Martin Luther did was take this revolutionary doctrine, the New Testament, and he allowed it to be interpreted by individuals. And therefore, he created the concept of freedom of conscience, your ability to talk to God yourself without it being filtered through the intermediary of the priesthood and the Pope and the bishops and the cardinals. And so, he created freedom. And the freedom was being demanded anyway. I mean, as I say, the emerging business class, that was coming forward from the 12th, 13th, 14th century onwards, demanding greater power, that they were getting more and more irritated by the fact that they were held back by established power structures. But what Martin Luther did, he was able to sort of come along and challenge those power structures using the Bible as his main weapon, if you like. And in terms of being burnt at the stake, I think Martin Luther ran into trouble with the Catholic Church. He was a very highly respected theologian, so I think he managed to escape being burnt at the stake. But subsequent people who tried to deliver the same kind of message that he delivered did find themselves being burnt at the stake. So there were lots of martyrs who were people who promoted Martin Luther's ideas, who came unstuck with the church authorities.
Between when Martin Luther started preaching his ideas and the Reformation, was there quite a gap?
Well, the Reformation began in about, I don't know the exact year, about 1517 or something like that. The early 16th century, and it kind of concluded probably about 300 years later. In Britain, Henry VIII kind of nailed the Reformation for us. Henry VIII, with all the shenanigans that went on with his wives and what have you, his 8 wives. How many wives did he have? 6 wives of Henry VIII. With his 6 wives, a lot of that was being played out theologically. He was in a way a bit of a pawn in the hands of the church. He was demanding the sort of freedoms that the Reformation was offering in places in Europe, so that he could divorce his wife, for example. He didn't have to go to the Pope and ask permission because he could just do it. That's what the Reformation allowed you to do. It allowed you to act in the interest of your own conscience. So when Henry VIII took us out of the influence of Rome and created the Church of England, that was the end point of the Reformation in Britain.
Yeah, so that happened with the church, and it sounds like what you would like with Marxism and your blue revolution is you'd like to do the same thing to the secular state, to bring it down to the individuals, so to have the individual connection with influencing the best of the community. So the Reformation did it to the Catholic Church, removed your connection to God through the Pope, and made it an individual connection. And I think what you're saying about you feel that the power, we don't need like these elite people at the top, empower the people at the bottom to do what the collective good for everyone is.
I mean, how do the people at the top know what to do? They're not down here with the vast majority of people at the bottom. And so therefore, what we need to do is whereas, what Martin Luther did was say, well, you should have freedom of conscience. You should be unfettered by an established church. I mean, it's been a complicated story, this, and it goes well beyond the days of Martin Luther, right up until this sort of 17th, 18th century, but just concentrating on Martin Luther, because I'm talking about the Reformation. Yes, I mean, what he wanted to do was free people's conscience. He wanted people to be able to read the Bible in their own language and to talk to God themselves. And I think with the next revolution, and we've touched on it earlier in this discussion, we need to have much more. The ordinary working person, the ordinary man and woman in the street, needs to have much more influence over political decision making. For example, would we prefer to sort of flatten the sort of the state? Would we like to have more influence over decisions like how much debt the country gets into, bearing in mind that as our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren will be paying for that debt? Would we like to sacrifice some of our own aspirations so that people in other countries that are struggling to meet their basic needs like food, shelter and water can have more of the resources that the planet's got to offer? There's all these sort of questions that we need to be asking, but you're not going to get the answer if you've got a top-down hierarchy where the people at the top believe they just got to literally sort of spoon the resources into the people at the bottom, and the people at the bottom have got no right to say, well, actually, I'd like to think about doing things in a slightly different way.
Yeah, because that's what happens. Is like currently democracy is classed as you get to vote once every 4 or 5 years, and that's your bit done.
Yeah.
Whereas really, like, we're intelligent enough to be able to give our views quite a lot of the time, rather than having it all pushed down. So yeah, and you can see how the Reformation sort of did flatten the religious triangle, didn't it? The priests in Vatican now are pretty much sort of similar.
Yeah, it did.
Isn't it? They're not held up here. You're not asking them for permission to do what you're wanting to do.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think in the Protestant world, it was very flat. You didn't really have bishops and people like that. I mean, he did in the Church of England because it carried on modelling itself on Rome for a very long time. It was our own John Cotton from Boston who sort of tried to challenge the hierarchy of the Church of England, which was very much a hierarchy based on the hierarchy of Rome. But in other Protestant sects and things, they were very flat. They didn't have a great hierarchy of leaders. They didn't need to, because you were able to communicate yourself with your own God. You didn't need to go through the intermediary of somebody else. So preachers didn't have the same role in Puritan churches as they did in the Catholic Church.
I can see how it can all happen in this way, because you've talked about, like, in your idea of a revolution, about empowering the people. So like local councillors can vote on national issues in the model
I think you've got
you suggested. So I can see like parallels in a model that's sort of similar about flattening the triangle and then empowering the people at the at the bottom.
Yeah. I think you've got to find a mechanism for doing this. I mean, the challenge for us as ordinary people who are down at the bottom of the pile, who've got our one opportunity to vote in a general election, and that then creates a government, and that government may or may not do what we would like it to do, but we're impotent if we've got the government that decides to do stuff we don't want. I mean, the new Labour government and Tony Blair went to war with Iraq. I mean, probably for me, that's the one policy that had no popular support amongst ordinary working people. I mean, we've got a split with Brexit. You know, half of the country was in favour, half was against, slightly more in favour of Brexit than was in favour of Remain. But you could at least say, you know, more than half won out. I think with the Iraq war, we had a population of people, probably 80% of whom felt that this was an illegal war. We shouldn't go to war with Iraq. And Tony Blair completely overrode the wishes of the people and went and embarked on what is now widely recognised as an illegal war. So you can't trust governments not to do things like that. And so therefore, we have to start using this as a warning that governments can potentially just go and do their own thing. And whether we like it or not, you know, we are going to be the victims or subject to whatever the government wants to do. So we have to, as you say, create mechanisms that bring much more influence to bear on government from ordinary working people. And one way of doing that is to empower your local council, so that your local council, your local councillors become a kind of lower tier, a scrutinising chamber. Scrap the House of Lords at the top, you know, vestige of the feudal system, create a lower chamber below the House of Commons, which has a very powerful scrutiny and reforming function, just like the House of Lords currently has. And you can include numerous elected members from lower tier authorities in that. It doesn't actually have to have a place that it sits. It could just be something that's done on Zoom, you know. But it's vitally important, I think, that we go on to the next stage of democracy when we start to get far more ordinary people involved in scrutinising decisions that are made by governments and made by Parliament.
And that can make the reason why that can make a difference, a bit like you were saying with the Reformation, is where you'd always have to contact the vicar or the god or sort of the Pope to get what you want. You can influence national decisions by just talking to someone who lives within a couple of mile radius of your of your house, and you go, how are you voting on this? Because, you know, under the Iraq War, your example of the Iraq War, I would imagine that most people would have contacted their local councillors and say, look, I know MPs perhaps have got 10 votes on whether we go to war, but I want you to use your one vote as the councillor to say no. And if all of those voted no, it put a lot of pressure on the MPs as well on how to vote. And it would listen to the will of the people a little bit more. I guess that's what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm saying exactly that. And I'm saying, and moreover, if your local councillor turned around and said, well, actually, I'm going to vote for the war in Iraq, then, you know, in 4 years' time, when that councillor comes up for re-election, you could stand against them and you could say, this fool voted in favour of that illegal war. You know, don't put him in power again or her in power again. Keep them away from, you know, political decision making. They've got no judgment. So you're absolutely right. It brings that. It doesn't bring. It's not exactly what you call direct democracy, but it's near as near to direct democracy using a sensible framework that makes it work. You can imagine it working. You can't imagine a situation where we've all got a button in our living rooms, and every time something happens in Westminster, we can vote on it and press that button. I mean, that's to me just seems somewhat utopian and rather naive, because where are you going to get the scrutiny from? Where are you going to get the sensible argument, the rational view that this is the wrong thing to do? But actually, if you've got really talented local councillors, some of whom may be business people, some of whom may be medical workers, people from the public sector, people in the private sector, you know, all able to sort of participate in a sensible way to a forum that's debating something like a war or another major piece of government policy, then, you know, you're going to get the nearest thing to proper scrutiny of power. You know, without all the nonsense of doing it like it's I don't know, the X Factor.
Yeah, and it's interesting, because I know I've spoken to you about Blue Revolution before, but this is the first time I've really got my head around Reformation, and with that, I can see parallels between the two ideas.
Yeah, it's all about, I mean, all of it. I mean, if you want, honestly, all of it's about flattening things out. It's about flattening things out. Whether it's I mean, the refrigerator sort of flattened out the availability of good food that enabled everybody to have food that didn't go off. You know, only the rich had ice houses. You know, they could have sort of out of season food because they could shove it in their ice house. Whereas the refrigerator gave everybody that kind of equality. Dogs are very sort of, you know, they form part of a pack. They're very, very equal. They work together to achieve a common objective. Marx obviously formulated this in terms of his thinking and argued that it's really where humanity needs to go in its next stage of its evolution, our evolution as human beings. Christ in the Gospels was the first person really to say it in a way which made sense to many, many other people, even though he was saying it in the first century. And then, of course, as you say, Martin Luther was the first person to come along and actually blow a raspberry at natural authority and say, there is no natural authority here. This is just a bureaucracy that's telling everybody lower down the hierarchy what they can and can't do, and it's got to go. It's got to change. So he kickstarted capitalism by kickstarting the theological underpinnings for something that became capitalism.
Yeah, it sums it up all pretty well, doesn't it? And so that's your 6 most amazing. So most amazing person, Karl Marx. Most amazing refrigerator. Most amazing animal, dog. Most amazing quote. I keep getting this wrong, and I've only written the first bit. From each according to their ability. No.
To each according to their needs.
Yeah, to each according to their needs. The book is New Testament, and the amazing thing ever is the Reformation. Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I think we sort of tied it up, and I like the way it all came together and how they all link. So before we go, have you got anything you'd like to promote or share that you'd like people to have a look at? We mentioned your leaflets. Do you have a website or anything that you'd want people to go to?
Yeah, well, if people are intrigued by what I've said, or maybe they're a little challenged by what I've said, there are various pamphlets that are available to try and explain it in more detail. And these pamphlets can be found at www.abluerevolution.org.
I'll put the link below.
And you put the link below, and there's various tabs. And if you click on the pamphlets tab, then you'll find all the current pamphlets available to read there.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. That was really interesting. And once again, if you want to check out our Dash Amazing, check out our other podcasts, or check out what interesting things and posts we've put on our website this week, or you want to have a look at our books, I've put the link below and you can check it out. And thank you, Mike. And I look forward to seeing you all again next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.